For years, I left my door slightly open every night, not for people but for a stray dog that slept outside. He never barked, he never came inside, he only stayed. Then one morning, I collapsed alone on a quiet road. My voice couldn't reach anyone. My body wouldn't move. What saved my life that day wasn't a phone or a stranger or luck. It was the same dog I never asked to stay, and the one who refused to leave. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and stay with this story, because to understand why that dog mattered, you first need to know how I ended up with no one else left. I live in a house people rarely notice anymore. It sits just far enough from the main road that no one stops without a reason, and just close enough that I can still hear life passing by. The walls are old, the paint faded, and the door never shuts the way it once did. Every evening before the light completely leaves the sky, I do the same thing. I turn off the lamp, place my shoes near the wall, and leave the door slightly open. Not wide enough to invite anyone in, not closed enough to shut the world out. That door is not for people. Outside, on the ground near the doorway, a stray dog sleeps. I don't remember the exact night he appeared. There was no moment of decision, no sound that announced him. One evening he was simply there, curled near the door as if he had always known that was his place. Thin, quiet, careful with his movements, he never barked and never stepped inside. Even when the nights grew cold, even when rain tapped against the roof, he stayed outside, close enough to feel present, distant enough to remain free. At first I ignored him. Loneliness teaches you caution. I told myself he would leave, that stray dogs always do. I had learned not to grow attached to things that arrive without warning. But the days passed, and the dog stayed. He did not chase passing vehicles or wander off at dawn. He did not beg. He did not demand anything from me. He simply lay near the door, breathing slowly, eyes alert whenever the night grew too quiet. Without thinking much about it, I began leaving a small bowl of water outside. Later, some food. Nothing special. Just what I had. I never called him closer. I never tried to touch him. There was an understanding between us that did not need words. He stayed where he was. I stayed where I was. The door between us remained half open, like a line neither of us felt the need to cross. Sometimes late at night I would sit on my bed and listen, not for danger, not for noise, but for proof that I wasn't entirely alone. The sound of his breathing outside the door became familiar, steady, almost comforting. On some nights, I would look outside and find him awake, watching the darkness as if guarding something important. On others he slept deeply, unaware of the world that had taught him to be careful. People noticed eventually. Some told me I was foolish to care for a dog that refused to come inside. Others warned me that strays bring trouble. I listened, nodded, and said nothing. Explaining would have required more words than I had left. The door stayed open, the dog stayed outside. And slowly, without either of us realizing it, the silence around my house began to feel less empty. I did not know then how long he would stay. I did not know that one day he would matter more than anyone else left in my life. At that moment, all I knew was this. For the first time in years, when night came and the house went quiet, I wasn't facing it completely alone. I was not always this quiet. There was a time when my life had a shape I could recognize, when days were filled with purpose and voices followed me wherever I went. I worked long hours then, convinced that effort alone could protect the people I loved. I believed that as long as I provided, everything else would somehow hold together. It took me years to understand how wrong that belief was, and by the time I did, the damage had already been done. My wife used to wait for me at the door in those days. At first, she asked questions, where I had been, why I came home so late, when things would slow down. Over time, the questions stopped. Silence replaced them, the kind that grows when two people begin living separate lives under the same roof. I noticed it too late. One evening I returned home to find the house half empty, her clothes gone, her presence erased as if she had never belonged there. She left with another man. She did not take the children. She did not leave a letter. She simply chose a different life and stepped into it without looking back. The children were very young then. A boy and a girl, both too small to understand why their mother was suddenly a memory instead of a person. I told them she had gone somewhere important, that she loved them, that she would return. Those were lies meant to protect them, but mostly they protected me from admitting the truth. I learned how to do everything alone, waking them up, feeding them, holding them when they cried for a woman who no longer answered their calls. I worked harder, slept less, and learned to measure strength by how much pain I could carry without letting it show. My son was the quieter one. He stayed close to me, followed me through the house, held my hand longer than necessary. My daughter watched from a distance, learning early how to survive by observing rather than asking. I told myself I was doing enough. I told myself that effort would be enough. Then one ordinary day, my son became ill. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made neighbors panic, a fever that lingered longer than it should have. I waited for it to pass. I believed it would. I always believed time would be on my side. It wasn't. By the time I understood how serious it was, the room already felt different. The air heavier, his small body weaker than it should have been. I remember holding him and realizing that no amount of work, no amount of sacrifice could bargain with fate. When he died, something in me went silent forever. I did not scream. I did not break down. I simply sat there, holding what was left of my world, wondering how life could continue so easily after taking something so important. After that, I became careful with love. My daughter became my responsibility and my reason, but I raised her with a distance I did not intend. I wanted to protect her from pain, yet I did not know how to do that without also protecting myself. Years passed quietly. She grew, studied, laughed with friends, dreamed of a future that no longer included me at its center. When she left with her boyfriend years later, engaged and hopeful, I smiled and told her I was proud. And I was. But when the door closed behind her, the house returned to the silence it had been practicing for years. Retirement came not long after, without work, without children, without a partner. I found myself surrounded by time I did not know how to fill. That was when I moved to this house. That was when I stopped expecting people to stay. And that was why, when a stray dog chose to sleep outside my door, I did not ask him to leave, and I did not ask him to come closer either. Life settled into a rhythm after that, one that did not demand much from me and asked even less in return. Days passed quietly, marked by small, repetitive tasks that gave structure to time without filling it with noise. I woke early, walked to the market when I needed supplies, and returned before the sun climbed too high. Evenings were the same. I cooked simple meals, cleaned without hurry, and prepared for night the way I always did, by leaving the door slightly open. The dog became part of that rhythm without ever trying to own it. He did not rush toward me when I stepped outside, and he never followed me when I left. He stayed near the doorway, always just far enough to remind me that he was there, but never close enough to feel like a demand. Some nights he slept deeply, curled against the wall. Other nights he remained awake, ears alert, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the road. I never knew what he was watching for, and I never asked. It felt wrong to question a vigilance that did not interfere with my own. I began to notice how carefully he observed the world. Every sound meant something to him, a distant engine, a sudden movement in the bushes. Even the shift in the wind seemed to register in his body before it reached my ears. I had spent most of my life ignoring such things, too busy or too tired to pay attention. Watching him reminded me that awareness was not anxiety. It was presence, something I had slowly lost over the years. I fed him what I could, leftover food, scraps, sometimes bread softened with water. He ate slowly, never greedily, as if he understood that nothing given to him was guaranteed. When he finished, he returned to his place without looking back at me. There was dignity in that restraint. I realized one evening that I trusted him, not because he had earned it through effort, but because he never tried to take more than was offered. People continued to comment when they saw him. Some asked why I didn't chase him away. Others asked why I didn't bring him inside. Their questions felt unnecessary. They assumed every bond needed rules, ownership, and names. I never named him. Names create expectations, and expectations have a way of breaking things that survive better without them. Between us, the door was enough of a boundary, half open, half closed. A shared understanding without explanation. There were nights when I sat just inside the doorway, listening to the quiet sounds of the world settling down. I could hear his breathing outside, steady and calm. That sound grounded me in a way I did not expect. It reminded me of evenings long ago when small feet moved through my house and life felt fragile but meaningful. I did not dwell on those memories. I let them pass through me like wind, present but not painful. I told myself often that this arrangement would not last. Stray dogs leave, life changes. I had learned not to mistake routine for permanence. Still, each evening when I opened the door and found him there, something in me softened, not hope, not attachment, just acceptance, the kind that comes when you stop asking how long something will stay and start appreciating that it is there at all. At that point, I still believed the dog was simply keeping me company through quiet nights. I did not know that he was doing more than that. I did not know that one day, when my body failed me and no human voice was close enough to hear, his refusal to leave would become the only reason I survived. Years passed without announcing themselves. I did not count them carefully, but I could see them in my reflection and in the way my body responded to simple tasks. The dog aged too. His movements slowed, his fur lost its shine, and his sleep grew deeper. Still, every evening, without fail, he returned to the same place outside my door. The routine remained unchanged even as time quietly reshaped us both. I began to rely on that routine more than I wanted to admit, not in a way that felt desperate, but in the way people lean on familiar things without realizing it. Knowing he would be there allowed me to face the nights with less resistance. The silence inside the house no longer pressed so heavily against my chest. It had shape now. It had company, even if that company stayed just outside the threshold. My health, however, did not share that stability. Small weaknesses crept in gradually, dizziness when I stood too quickly, a tightness in my chest that came and went without warning. I told myself it was nothing. Old age, I said, a convenient explanation that allowed me to avoid confronting my own fragility. I had spent a lifetime enduring loss. I did not want to spend my remaining years fearing it. The dog noticed changes before I did. On days when my steps were slower, he stayed closer to the door. On evenings when I sat longer than usual before standing, he remained awake, watching me rather than the road. I never acknowledged it out loud, but I felt it, a quiet awareness passing between us. He was not guarding the house. He was watching me. One afternoon, I returned from the market exhausted in a way that felt unfamiliar. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, and the air inside the house felt heavier than it should have. I sat down, telling myself it would pass. Outside, I heard the dog shift his position, his body tensing. When I stood again, the room tilted sharply, forcing me to grab the wall to stay upright. I laughed softly at myself, embarrassed by my weakness, as if anyone were there to witness it. That night, sleep came in fragments. I woke often, disoriented, unsure of how much time had passed. Each time I heard him outside, moving slightly, adjusting his position. His presence anchored me in the darkness. Without it, I might have mistaken the confusion for something worse. I promised myself I would rest more. I promised myself many things that night, most of which I would forget by morning. By the time dawn arrived, I felt steadier. I convinced myself the episode had been nothing more than fatigue. Life returned to its quiet pattern. Days followed nights. The dog followed his routine. I followed mine. Neither of us acknowledged how close the balance was to breaking. Neither of us needed to. Looking back now, I understand that part 4 of my life was not about peace. It was about warning. The kind that arrives gently, disguised as normalcy. The kind that gives you time to notice if you are willing to pay attention. I was not, but the dog was. And that difference would soon matter more than I could have imagined. The day everything went wrong did not feel important when it began. There was no sense of danger in the air, no warning strong enough to stop me from following my routine. I woke up slower than usual, my body heavy, my thoughts slightly distant, but not alarmed. I told myself it was just another tired morning. Old age again. The excuse I had learned to use whenever something felt off. I washed my face, changed my clothes, and decided to walk to the market before the sun climbed too high. The dog watched me from his place near the door as I stepped outside. He did not lie down after I left the way he usually did. He stood instead, ears alert, eyes fixed on me, as if waiting for something. I paused for a moment, unsure why that look unsettled me. I spoke to him softly, the way people speak when they don't want to admit they're uneasy, and then I continued down the road. The walk felt longer than it should have. My legs moved, but without confidence. Each step required more attention, more effort. The road was quiet, almost empty, stretching ahead of me under the open sky. Halfway there, a sudden weakness spread through my chest, sharp enough to steal my breath. I stopped, hoping it would pass. It didn't. The world tilted and my knees gave way before I could react. I fell hard onto the ground. For a moment I lay there, stunned by the impact, staring at the sky as it blurred above me. I tried to move, but my body refused to respond. My arms felt distant, my voice trapped somewhere inside my chest. Panic crept in slowly, not as fear, but as realization. No one was nearby. No one could see me. The road I walked so often had become a place where silence worked against me. I tried to call out, but the sound barely left my throat. My vision narrowed, the edges darkening, as if the day itself was retreating. I thought of my daughter then, not with regret, but with acceptance. I thought of the years I had lived, the things I had endured, and the quiet way I had learned to disappear. Lying there, helpless, it felt like that disappearance was finally complete. Somewhere in that fading awareness, I heard something. At first I thought it was my imagination, a sound I wanted to hear rather than one that was real. Then it came again, barking, loud, urgent, wrong in a way that cut through the haze in my mind. That dog had never barked like that before, not once in all the years he slept outside my door. The sound grew closer. I could not turn my head, but I sensed movement, fast and determined. The barking did not stop. It filled the road, echoing against the emptiness, demanding attention in a way I never could. Somewhere beyond my fading sight I heard footsteps, voices, confusion, hands reaching for me, lifting me carefully from the ground. As the world slowly returned, clarity came with it. The dog had followed me. He had not stayed by the door that day. He had not accepted routine. He had sensed what I could not, and refused to let me disappear quietly. As I was carried away from the road, barely conscious, one thought stayed with me stronger than any pain or fear. If he had not broken his silence, if he had not chosen to follow instead of wait, this would have been the last road I ever walked. When I woke up, the world felt unfamiliar, as if I had been placed inside it rather than returned to it. The ceiling above me was white and clean, interrupted only by a slow-moving fan. The smell of medicine hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. For a few moments, I did not know where I was or how I had arrived there. Then the memory of the road, the fall, and the barking pushed its way back into my thoughts. A doctor stood nearby, speaking softly to someone I couldn't see. His words reached me in pieces: exhaustion, dehydration, heart strain. He said I had been found just in time. Another hour, he explained later, and the outcome might have been very different. I listened without responding. I had lived long enough to understand what those words really meant. My body had given me a warning, and I had ignored it. Survival this time had not come from my own strength. When they allowed me to sit up, the first thing I asked about was the dog. The question surprised the nurse, but she answered honestly. He had stayed outside the clinic for hours, refusing to move. They tried to chase him away. He returned. They tried again. He lay down near the entrance and waited, as if he knew leaving would undo everything he had just done. Only when they brought me outside briefly, wrapped in a blanket, did he finally step back. I closed my eyes when I heard that, not because I was overwhelmed, but because something inside me finally gave way. I had spent so many years believing I was invisible, that my absence would go unnoticed, that my life had already quieted into irrelevance, and yet a creature who owed me nothing had decided that my existence mattered enough to fight for. Recovery took time. My body demanded patience, something I had never been good at. Each day I sat up a little longer. Each step came with effort. People from the nearby houses stopped by, curious about what had happened, offering help they had never thought to offer before. I accepted it without pride. That too was a lesson I learned late, that refusing help does not make you strong, it only makes you alone. When I returned home, the house felt different. Not larger, not brighter, just more honest. The door was still there, worn and imperfect, but I no longer left it half open out of habit. I left it open because I wanted to. The dog stood nearby, watching me with the same calm attention he always had. Nothing had changed in his behavior, and yet everything had changed in mine. For the first time, I reached down and touched him. He did not flinch. He did not pull away. He accepted the gesture without expectation, the way he had accepted everything else I ever gave him. In that simple contact, I felt a connection stronger than words, built not from ownership or obligation, but from choice. I understood then that the dog had not saved me because he was loyal in the way people describe loyalty. He saved me because he stayed when routine failed, when silence became dangerous, when waiting was no longer enough. He stayed when it mattered most. That night, as I rested inside my house, listening to the familiar sounds of the world settling down, I realized something quietly but completely. I had not been living on borrowed time since that day on the road. I had been given time back. Time I now understood was meant to be shared, not spent alone behind a half-open door. After that day, I stopped pretending that nothing had changed. The truth was, everything had. The house was the same, the road was the same, even my routines looked familiar from the outside. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. I no longer moved through my days as if I were preparing to disappear quietly. Survival had forced me to acknowledge a responsibility I had avoided for years. Not just to stay alive, but to remain present. The dog sensed the change before I named it. He stayed closer now, not in the doorway, not outside by default, but near enough that I could feel his presence without searching for it. Still, he never demanded entry. That choice remained his. One evening, as the sun lowered and the air cooled, I opened the door fully and stepped aside. I did not call him. I did not gesture. I simply waited. After a moment that felt longer than it was, he crossed the threshold on his own. He did not rush in or explore. He lay down near the door, the same place he had claimed outside for years, as if honoring the space we had shared from opposite sides. I sat nearby, watching him breathe. aware that this small act carried more meaning than most of the milestones people celebrate. It was not about ownership. It was about trust, built slowly and tested once when it mattered most. My days became gentler after that. I rested when my body asked for it. I accepted help without shame. I walked shorter distances, paying attention to my limits instead of challenging them. The dog followed at a distance, always within sight, always alert. He no longer needed to bark. His job had already been done. Sometimes, late in the evening, I thought about my past differently than I used to. The losses no longer stood alone as evidence of failure. They felt like chapters that had led me here, to a life simpler than the one I imagined in my youth, but truer than anything I had lived before. I had measured success by work, by family, by endurance. Now I measured it by presence, by the ability to sit in silence without feeling erased. The world outside continued as it always had. People passed, seasons changed, and stories moved on without me at their center. And that was fine. I did not need to be remembered by many. I only needed to be known by one. Each time I looked at the dog resting nearby, I was reminded that loyalty does not announce itself loudly. It reveals itself when routine breaks and something chooses to stay anyway. As night settled and the house grew quiet once more, I closed the door gently, not to keep the world out, but to rest within it. For the first time in a long while, the silence did not feel like absence. It felt like peace, shared with a heartbeat that refused to let mine fade unnoticed. Life did not turn extraordinary after that. There were no dramatic changes, no sudden happiness, no feeling that everything had been repaired. What changed was smaller, and because of that, it lasted. Mornings arrived with less resistance. I woke knowing that my presence mattered to at least one living being, and that knowledge carried me through the day more steadily than hope ever had. The dog grew older just as I did. His steps became slower, his sleep longer, his eyes softer. We moved through time together without rushing it. Some days we sat near the door in silence, watching light shift across the ground. Other days we walked short distances, stopping often, listening more than moving. Neither of us needed much anymore. Food, rest, and the quiet understanding that we would not be abandoned without warning. I thought often about how easily my life could have ended on that road, unnoticed and unfinished. That thought no longer frightened me. Instead, it grounded me. It reminded me that meaning does not come from how loudly we live or how many people remember our names. Sometimes it comes from the smallest refusal, a refusal to leave, a refusal to stay silent, a refusal to let another life fade without witness. I never told the dog he saved me. Words felt unnecessary. He had never acted for praise or reward. He acted because something in him understood that staying mattered more than waiting. That lesson stayed with me long after the fear had faded. When the world grows quiet now, I do not confuse silence with emptiness. I know the difference. As the seasons turned and time continued its patient work, I found myself grateful in a way I had never been before. Not for a second chance, not for survival, but for the clarity that came with it. I had spent years believing I was finished, that my story had already reached its quiet end. I was wrong. The ending I feared had already passed long ago, when I stopped expecting connection. What followed was not an ending at all, but a slower, truer way of living. If this story means anything, it is this. Some bonds are not loud, not dramatic, and not planned. They arrive quietly, settle into routine, and reveal their strength only once. And when they do, they leave behind a truth that stays long after the moment has passed. I was not saved by noise, by crowds, or by luck. I was saved because one soul chose not to walk away.